Good afternoon. Uh, Welcome, everyone. Sorry. We are waiting for every other person in the waiting room to be admitted as we go towards uh, the time, or as we head towards the time to start the conversation. So we would request that we all just be patient a little while. We only have about 3 minutes, and we take up the session, waiting for a few more people to get into the room or to be admitted into the room. So we uh, kindly ask you to just be patient. We'll start in a short while. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon once more. Uh, and welcome to the fifth conversation on gender and climate change in Africa. These conversations are hosted by ICCASA and in partnership with the Center for Minority Rights Development. ICCASA is working towards an equitable and inclusive climate resilient tomorrow and aims to enhance adaptive capacity, resilience among communities in Africa through a gender transformative and socially inclusive approach, and promote gender responsive climate policy, actions, and strategies. Uh, there have been other conversations, and this is a series. There are going to be other conversations after this one. My name is Nyangori Ohenjo. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, Center for Minority Rights Development, and I welcome you all to actively participate in today's conversation on gender and on the role of universities in addressing climate change, uh, implication for gender mainstreaming in the African context. Now, just uh, one or two things about Semirite, Center for Minority Rights Development. It was founded in the year 2001 with its main aim of securing the rights of minorities and indigenous peoples, mainly in Kenya, but our work sometimes traverses boundaries. Uh, we've worked over the years through research, advocacy, through public interest litigation, the most prominent one being the Enroy's case that was litigated at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, uh, which verdict was returned in favor of the community and which started actually the official recognition or the official legal recognition in Africa of the existence of indigenous peoples. In the recent past, we've been engaging in climate change conversations. Uh, Semiride is a member of the Climate Smart Agriculture Multi-Stakeholder Platform and also the member of the steering committee thereof, representing the voices of indigenous peoples. We are also on the implementation committee, the National Implementation Committee of a government-led climate resilience program, which is EU funded. And we've also implemented a number of other projects, including Voice for Change, which was a climate policy project uh, that targeted the strengthening of voices of marginalized communities in climate change discourse. And two outputs that are very that come out of this effort was the engagement framework with the Climate Change Directorate in Kenya for indigenous communities to be able to effectively and consistently engage with climate change decision making. That is the question of ensuring mainstreaming and inclusion. And also, we were able, together with our partner organizations, develop a gender toolkit. So it will be very interesting. It's actually very interesting for us to be part of this conversation going forward. So would like to notify participants that the conversation, this particular session will be recorded. I do hope that we have no problem with that. These conversations are also streaming live on the ICCASA Facebook page and the YouTube channel. We also encourage you to tweet the conversation using the hashtag uh, gender and climate conversations. For those ones of us who have Twitter and social media handles, please type your question in the chat box and they'll be answered after our guest speaker, who is Dr. David Sakamate, a consultant, monitoring and evaluation expert in Uganda Management Unit. Dr. Ssekamatte will be conversing with us on this topic, which we have already mentioned, the role of universities in addressing climate change, implications for gender and mainstreaming in the African context. So I would I would like to just introduce to us Dr. David Sakamate very briefly. He is a consultant and a lecturer uh, in monitoring and evaluation at the Uganda Management Institute, and he has more than 18 years experience in program management, monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning, and management consultancy in education and health sectors. He has worked with various education service and health-related development organizations as program manager, monitoring and evaluation manager before he joined academia. His research interests are in the areas of sustainability, climate change education, environmental citizenship, higher education management, as well as monitoring and evaluation. He has also authored a number of peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on climate change education, sustainability, higher education governance, management, as well as monitoring and evaluation. He is a senior NAFSA fellow and a DAD postdoctoral fellow on indigenous knowledge and climate change under the Climate Africa program at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. He has supervised over 40 bachelor's and master's students research to completion. Dr. Ssekamatte holds a PhD in education and social sciences at Karl van Ossezky University of Oldenburg, Germany, and a Master of Arts in economics of the University of Lucknow in India. So briefly, that is our guest today, David Sakamate. He has a very, very rich experience, both in practice and in research. And we are really honored to have him here today to be leading us in this conversation. So I would want to invite Dr. Ssekamatte. Please take over the session. And as I had indicated, please, if we have a question, let us type them in the chat box, and then we'll have people, we'll have the guest respond to them after he's made his presentation. Welcome, Dr. Ssekamatte.
Thank you. Thank you very much, the chair of the conversation today. I'm so grateful to be invited as a guest speaker in this conversation. I want to first of all appreciate ICCASA for organizing this. This is my first time to attend the conversations, and I look forward to also attending other conversations as well to learn from other speakers. It's interesting to discuss and share around climate change and how it actually interfaces with gender. And I think we all appreciate that gender is very, very key in terms of programming, but also in policies as well as development. And climate change is a very key thing that we all need to think about, especially both women, girls, men, and boys, all of us. So in my presentation, I will give a short introduction, and then I'm presenting some findings, which were part of a research that I conducted some time back. So I will briefly give the state of the art and the research gap, and then the project and the focus of the paper. Then I will briefly take you through the research design and methodology, and then the key findings, and then implications for gender mainstreaming in climate change education. Like the chairperson has told you, I'm a climate change education researcher. It's really quite a unique area. There's quite a lot of research on climate change that is done. Mine is around climate change and sustainability education, because I'm an educationalist by background and training. So in my introduction, we all appreciate that the climate change problem is very, very serious. And you can just see out of these pictures across different sectors. If you look at, it has created dissertation, the issues around deforestation, the issues around flooding. There's a bit of melting snows at Kilimanjaro that we are all aware is happening due to climate change. We see a number of issues around malaria, as well as other sicknesses. And then we see agriculture being affected, especially livestock. You can see goats dying in the process due to effects of climate change. And then, of course, water, access to water and all those. So there are quite a number of effects of climate change on different sectors of the economy. Let's continue on the next. So climate change remains the most inevitable and urgent challenge that's facing humanity. And there's quite a lot of literature that indicates that. And it affects agriculture, food security, livelihoods, water resources, human health, and so many others. And it's responsible for global warming, excessive floods like you've seen, wildfires, hurricanes, rising sea level, droughts, and others, as you can see. But there has been a number of political and educational responses to climate change. And we will start with international legislation that many of you are aware: UNFCCC 1992, the Kyoto Protocol 1997, the Marrakesh Accord 2001, and other accords, Copenhagen Konkan Agreement, the Doha Amendment, and the recent Paris Agreement in 2015. These are more political, and they engage a number of political actors to be able to do something about the problem. Nationally, we have a number of legislations and interventions. For example, in Uganda, where I come from, I'm Ugandan, we have a national climate policy framework, and as well as national community-based mitigation and adaptation interventions that are happening, implemented by Ministry of Environment, and even NGOs that are also participating in many of this. And I know in Kenya, it is the same, as well as other. I saw someone from Sierra Leone and so many other countries. There are those domesticated kind of policy frameworks, strategies, and interventions. But we of recent discovered that education can play a very big role in addressing issues of climate change. And that's how we find ourselves talking about environment education, which has been around for some time, but it wasn't really targeting climate change, but looking at the environment holistically. And there's quite a lot of literature around environment education. Then the recent one is what we call the sustainability education, or other people, especially UNESCO, called it education for sustainable development. This is education that is focusing on looking at issues of sustainable development, especially looking at SDGs and how education can be able to be key in terms of addressing many of these issues. Now, there is a narrow focus on climate change education now we are talking about, and I'm one of the researchers in that area. Climate change education will say, how can universities and schools and all these different higher education institutions do something about climate change? And in terms of the overall situation, there is literature that shows that the education sector is yet to be exploited. Moreover, it has a big potential of addressing issues of climate change. Aspects of climate change are visible in the curriculum of some secondary schools, especially in science disciplines in a few countries, but many universities still hold misconceptions about climate change. And therefore, that makes it very, very important for universities, but also other people in academia and schools to start discussing on how to integrate issues of climate change in their programs. There's literature around training that universities in Europe, Australia, and North America run more study programs on climate change compared to African and Latin American universities. And that also shows that in Africa, as well as Latin American universities, there's not so much that is actually happening. In terms of research, we see that a few universities in Africa are engaged in climate change research, and mostly from South Africa. So you find that most of the papers around climate change are coming from South Africa. There's less research output cited in scientific journals from the entire continent. A few universities in Africa have established climate change centers. For example, Makerere University here in Uganda has a climate change center. University of Dar es Salaam also has a climate change center. University of Cape Town and a few others. But so many have not yet started anything like that. In terms of community interventions, universities in Africa have low level of engagement with the local communities on climate change. And again, literature is showing us. Therefore, there is this research gap that I identified when I was engaging this research, that limited scholarly literature or research on the role of the university and institutional support for climate change education at case universities from the perspectives of university lecturers, administrators, and students is limited or inadequate. inadequately covered, especially in the African context. So that pushed me to go and do research. So the findings in this paper are part of a larger study that I conducted between 2016 and 2018 at two case universities in East Africa. That's University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and Makerere University in Uganda. So the study explored opportunities and challenges of climate change education at these universities in the African context. So the paper is presenting findings regarding perspectives and views and opinions, as well as experiences of university lecturers, administrators, and students on climate change study and research-related programs at these two universities, with respect to the role of the university in addressing climate change and what implications are there for gender mainstreaming in the African context. So what are the key research questions I am addressing? One is that what are the perspectives and views of university lecturers, administrators, and students regarding the role of the university in addressing issues of climate change? But the other very important question is, what is the implication for gender mainstreaming in the African context? Just take you through briefly on the research, design, and methodology. I took the interpretivism paradigm and specifically looking at the social constructivism perspective, and therefore my research was qualitative. And I had multiple qualitative comparative case study design. I sampled 2 cases, and I had 58 participants who were lecturers, researchers, administrators, and students that work on climate change related kind of programs and research. So I did 18 semi-structured in-depth interviews, 5 focus group discussions, and then also did document review. And I analyzed data using thematic analysis based on V. Brown and V. Clark 2006. So let me run straight to the key findings on the role of the university in addressing climate change. So I had some similarities in views on the roles. In Makerere University, participants said that the university can generate scientific knowledge on climate change by doing research. They can also provide training and capacity building, and they can also sensitize and provide policy guidance to government and other NGOs or other actors in climate change. At the University of Dar es Salaam, they had similar kind of views where they were talking about knowledge generation, which is the same, a home for training and capacity building. And so they thought that the university can be able to train through undergraduate and postgraduate programs a number of experts on climate change, and that they can also have short-term kind of capacity building programs that they can organize for civil society, for the private sector, but also other people. And then they say it's the source of information and the policy guidance as well. So those were quite similar views on the roles by the two universities. But there were some few differences where they said that the university can actually advance innovation in technological solutions to climate change, especially in supporting climate change adaptation and mitigation. So they thought in Makerere that university can engage in some kind of innovations and also come up with very unique technological solutions to some of the problems that are brought about by climate change that affect communities and economies. But at the University of Dar es Salaam, they had some differences in views. They talked about providing technical support to other actors, that the university can engage with NGOs, can engage with private sector in so many other actors, provide them technical support because it has expertise as well as information, but also could be a leader of action in communities, that it can engage communities to be able to come up with interesting and workable mitigation measures. So generally, participants agree that African universities can play a significant role in climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. Now, these are just some quotations from some of the participants of Makerere University and University of Dar es Salaam. And as you can see, they are talking about the university, for example, in Makerere, being the one that produces human resource for the country. So by integrating climate change in its curriculum, in its teaching and learning, they will be able to produce the human resource that is responsive to the changes in climate change. And of course, that would have a multiplier effect in the various sectors. So they were saying that having or producing products or graduates who have some knowledge, some training on climate change is therefore very, very important. The one of University of Dar es Salaam says education is important at all levels because we are talking about mainstreaming climate change issues in the development process. And there are these people who at the stage, at one stage will be, working in various sectors. And many of these young people are within the university doing different courses. So they were talking about integrating aspects of climate change into the programs and mainstreaming them so that each one of them can have some dose of climate change so that as they go out to start working, they can be able to do some work. Now, based on those findings, therefore, the question comes that what are the implications of these for gender mainstreaming in climate change education? We all know that gender denotes the social meaning and roles that are assigned to the male and female in a particular community. That means that gender is socially constructed. Every society assigns gender roles, responsibilities that are learned, and expectations from society for both men and women, girls and boys. Almost in all societies, men and women have different economic and social roles and responsibilities. Therefore, the gender, multiple social and economic roles that you all know about, the production roles, the reproduction roles, and the community roles, are quite often define acceptable economic and social behavior for men and women in this particular society. Every society will definitely, assign these roles. Therefore, such assigned roles and responsibilities have serious implications on climate change because climate change in one or the other is behavior. Almost all these scientists that have come up with research around climate change are all talking about the behavior of people. So such assigned roles and responsibilities have serious implications on climate change and sustainability, since they influence how women and men, girls and boys use natural resources and engage in activities that may contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, mainstreaming gender in climate change education can significantly enhance behavior change among women and men, girls and boys, towards climate-friendly actions and practice. And there are so many girls and women in many of these universities. So since higher education institutions house thousands of women and men, including young adults, it is an avenue for ensuring that these get a dose of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that promote climate-friendly production, climate-friendly consumption, and climate-friendly practices in their communities. Universities, therefore, ought to come up with effective strategies of mainstreaming gender into climate change education programs. And here I'm talking about training, research, and innovation. I'm talking about community engagement. I'm talking about policy advice to governments, but also the private sector. So there is a need to come up with effective strategies to mainstream gender into climate change education programs that I've just talked about. The programs should ensure that men and women equally benefit and actively participate to promote climate change mitigation and adaptation during and after university training. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, in my conclusion, study participants across the case universities have identified several roles that a university can play in addressing climate change, including generating knowledge through research, providing training and capacity building, sensitizing communities, and providing policy guidance to governments on climate change. These perspectives can be handled for universities and other higher education institutions that are yet to start climate change education programs in Africa to be able to wake up and do something. It is also important for us to know that universities ought to mainstream gender into their climate change programs to ensure that women and men, including young adults, not only get a dose of climate change knowledge, skills, and attitudes, but also actively participate in climate change mitigation and adaptation while they are still at universities in training, but also after the training when they join the workforce. And therefore, in this particular conversation, the questions I would want us to think about is what could be the most effective strategies that our universities and higher education institutions can actually adapt in order to mainstream gender and ensure that girls and boys and women and men equally participate in climate change mitigation programs and adaptation programs, but also in supporting each other to be able to do. So what are the effective strategies that we can do? How do we engage boys and girls as well as women and men in effectively engaging or dealing with climate change while at university, but also when they get out of the university? I would be happy to hear your thoughts on this, and we can be able to engage in a conversation on these issues. I thank you and all the best. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ssekamatte, for that very engaging, interesting, and wonderful presentation. It's quite an interesting conversation because I think in Africa, and as has been mentioned, coming out of your study, we are yet to find the confluence between academics and policy. We're yet to really find a middle point where academics influence policy around issues like climate change and, of course, gender. And one clear issue that is coming out is that we cannot underestimate the role, or we cannot underplay the role that universities have in this very critical issue of gender and climate change. We would like, therefore, to, at this point, get into the next part of the session, which is conversations around the issues that Dr. David Sakamate has discussed on the role of universities in addressing climate change, implications for gender mainstreaming in Africa. If you would want to speak, those of us who would want to share in the conversation, ask a question, please let us know through the chat box, or you can raise your hand using the raising of hand function on your webinar tool. So let us engage, and probably as we wait, I'm yet to see any hand raised. As we wait for people to start engaging in this conversation, Dr. Ssekamatte, just a quick one. Looking at your bio, you are engaging in areas around indigenous people's research. How do we locate, or where do we position this within the context of intersectionality of issues? Because when you're just talking of gender, there's definitely a question of disaggregation. How do we deal with the disaggregation or intersectionality issues? And as you deal with that, probably before you even get into it, John Mary, is that your name? I'll give you a chance to ask a question, and then you will respond to those two questions as we ask for the two.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Please proceed.
Oh, all right, all right. All right, thank you. My network is not so good. You'll bear with me in case it gets cut here and there. I'm John Mary. I'm chairman of Board of Climate Action Network in Uganda. And I've been in and around issues of climate change here and outside the country. And I'm very, very happy for the presentation that the doctor has made. And that has been part of the things that I've been thinking about to appreciate and to also to take part actively in issues around the climate change. And of course, extremely important. What I realize is that at the university,
we are losing
I
you.
think there's academic issues and those who are not really directly involved maybe in issues of environment and so on will see climate change as something out of their scope, something maybe not part of them and something like that. And so for me, it's extremely, extremely important that we get, I think, more focused, more deliberate way of getting the young people in the universities get interested in issues of climate change. And I think maybe it needs to go beyond this. I don't know whether it can start at a lower level, whether it can be part of the curriculum, whether it can be, there's need, I think, to have it deliberately introduced into the young people. When you look at the issues of gender in climate change, and I think we have had many studies, many researchers speaking about issues, how gender aspects in there, I think maybe there's no balance between the men and the women, how climate change affects them. And I think, again, this is something very, very important that needs to be studied or, made some research about the effects of gender on women, especially. If we look at how people grapple with issues of climate change in this country, in Uganda, you got northern Uganda here and there and so on. It's first the brunt of this. And I think that is something also that maybe the university needs to do some research about. How do we make it a little bit softer, a little bit easier for women to cope with issues of climate change in this? Of course, sometimes the cultural tendency may not allow the men to actively participate because their roles could be different. But how do they get in to appreciate the things that affect the women into delivering maybe services for the homes in that manner? All right. Thank you so much. I think that's what I wanted to share with you. But I'm very happy with the presentation that the doctor has made. Thank you so much.
Okay, John Mary, thank you very much. Let's have Dr. Ssekamatte respond to those, and then after that, we go to Elizabeth Jayol and Mary Nyasimi. Let's have Dr. Ssekamatte respond first before we come to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Chair. I want to appreciate John Mary for his very friendly comments. And I think that's very, very important because we are talking about how can education engage young people, both men and women, in looking and talking about issues of climate change. Many universities, most times, and especially universities I've been to, especially in Uganda and Tanzania, quite often issues of climate change are discussed. They are discussed in forestry, they are discussed in maybe in agriculture, they are discussed in geography. But we are saying even people who are doing other things, arts or political science or whatever, need a dose. People who are doing engineering, they need a dose. Because all these, in wherever they go, they will definitely have something to do with climate change. If they don't have any decision they have to take, either in their offices, at least they'll be affected by climate change at home. So part of my research, and I would love, if possible, maybe I could link up with John Mary, the Climate Change Network, and we have this conversation more and more, and see within Uganda or even within the region, how can we be able to advance this kind of discussion around how universities can be able to do this. Yes, you talked about looking at research around how does climate change affect, for example, women or girls? Is it the same way it affects men and women? I think that is a very brilliant kind of area for research that we need to do. And I would be happy to join some people who are interested in doing this, and we can be able to do it within the region. And these effects, of course, somehow would help for policymakers to be able to think about what kind of support can we give women or girls, and what kind of support can we give men, rather than thinking that the policies and the kind of strategies they put in place are gender blind. Therefore, they don't need to be disaggregated in terms of the genders. Now, Chair, you asked me a question around my work around indigenous knowledge. Within the education, personally, and for my postdoc, and again, under the DAD Climb Up Africa, it's a program that is getting scientists on African continent to be able to start thinking about different aspects of climate change. So I belong to a working group on climate change and indigenous knowledge. And what we are looking at there is basically trying to research into indigenous people and indigenous knowledge, and being able to see what can we pick that can support mitigation and adaptation, the interface between climate change science and indigenous people. And that's what we are looking at. And personally, I'm again looking at how indigenous knowledge can be exploited to support and inform climate change education at universities. So you asked me about the issue of gender aggregation in climate change and indigenous knowledge. And I think that it's quite timely for us not to think about only listening to the voices of the men, because quite often when we go to households, then we only listen to the voices of the men. But can we also look at the voices of the women and see what is it in their indigenous practices, indigenous knowledge, the knowledge they have of their community? What is it that we can be able to use to support mitigation efforts as well as adaptation measures in their communities? How do we engage them using the indigenous knowledge that they have to be able to support them cope or adapt to climate change, but also in one way, think about this. And therefore, gender aggregation is very important because it would give us an idea of how women experience climate change, how men experience climate change. But it is also wrong for us to think that women and girls experience climate change the same way. There is a possibility that women experience it differently from the girls. The same way men experience it maybe differently from the boys. And so getting this data to be able to support us think about mitigation and adaptation, but also policy kind of interventions would be very, very key. And I would again be interested. I know that in the next conversation, we'll be talking about gender aggregation in climate change programming. I would want to participate so that we can have the conversation again around there. And I learned quite a lot. But I think it's a very important thing for us to be able to look at these in a disaggregated way so that we can be able to address the issues that affect them as individuals.
Thank you, Dr. Ssekamatte, for those insightful reactions. I would like to give this chance to Elizabeth Jayol. And Dr. Mary, are you still wanting to? Your hand went down.
Yes,
okay,
my hand is still up.
Oh, I didn't see it. So can we have Elizabeth and then you? Elizabeth, let's have it very briefly.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I was struggling to
have good network, and I missed the presentation. But
Sorry.
there are some quick observations or rather intervention I would like to make so that as we proceed before we round up or after, we could follow up to discuss. My name is Elizabeth Jeyo. I'm a faculty member of the Department of Geography, Faculty of Environmental Sciences, Benue State University in North Central Nigeria. I'm happy to be joining in this discussion today. And I want to commend ICCASA for this great work they are doing towards advancing, issues of gender with particular reference to climate change. I would like to say that in Nigeria, the awareness and knowledge level of academics in terms of regarding environmental issues in general and climate change and gender and climate change particularly is high. But then to say that with particular attention to gender and climate change, let me say this. Not many colleagues believe, even at this point, that gender is the core issue of discussions when we discuss environmental issues and also climate change as well. I remember I'm coming from the interest and passion on the environment. And then when I took to academics and joined the academia, and then I even right from my research in undergraduate, I started looking at environment. And then I could see that from growing up, I working with my mom on the farm, the bias and the differentiated roles of men and women, I started bringing this issue up. And I know to date, I am being ridiculed sometimes even among colleagues. And so it's to say that we need to pay attention to this. Why do I say this? Even at this point, you see curriculum being developed, you see the bias, you see even issues of gender and environment. Things like disaster management courses and all, they do not have gender in environment, gender and this, and even in climate change, even in disaster as a core course. And then you begin to put up a fight. And then you are a kind of like ridiculed. Nobody wants to see, nobody seems to agree. I keep referring colleagues to so much information that is online from UNFCCC. But then as in practice in Nigeria, thank God ICCASA supported through web, and then we now have a national action plan on gender and climate change. By and large, we need to focus attention on this, especially among colleagues in the academia, and see how we can bring in many colleagues to identify this issue as an issue to deepen, to focus, put such light on research, and to begin to do actions on it, because at this point, it's sad to know that where we are in terms of climate change and also other environmental issues, not much is being done on that side. Not so many colleagues believe. And so sometimes those at the forefront trying to advocate do not receive enough support within the immediate environment, and then they're not able to do what we can do. What I'm saying, the request I'm making is, how do we proceed with this in the context of Africa and in universities? I know already I've had, where we can have, sharing in best practices, we can have clubs and all of that. We are trying to do all of this. I know interventions that we've done even during WED and conversations that are ongoing with my faculty and my department, but so much needs to be done. How can ICCASA deepen and escalate actions on all of these that we are discussing, ever since I came on board to join, and in the conversation, to ensure that a proper action is taken moving forward, especially working with the academia and universities and other institutions in Nigeria. It's something that I'm available for us to discuss one-on-one and bilaterally, and with other CSOs that are also focused and colleagues that I know are out there, so that we can continue intervention in this. Thanks for the attention. Thank you, and for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think your network was quite okay. And one thing that is coming out very clearly is, how do we deepen this conversation? Of course, coming from the reality that we're still very far off the mark when it comes to gender mainstreaming, or do we call it gender inclusion, in climate change conversations in Africa? How do we ensure that we're able to up our scale on this particular issue? Mary, it's your chance. We would like to end at 10, so we are hoping that we are able to be as brief as possible. If there's anybody out there who would still want to ask a question or make a comment, let's see your hand up. Mary?
Thank you, moderator. And thank you to Dr. David for such an excellent presentation. Indeed, I do agree that universities have a wealth of knowledge at their disposal that can be used for the good. And universities do have expertise that can help us fight climate change. And as leaders in knowledge creation and research, universities are in a unique position to leverage their expertise and make significant advancements in the fight against climate crisis with a gender lens. Universities can also shape how gender can be mainstreamed in climate change space by conducting gender responsive research and educating students to us as catalysts for real and lasting change in the field of interlinking gender equality and climate change in Africa. I believe it is time that we should all start developing a conversation around the roles of universities in conducting gender responsive research and collecting sex disaggregated data to inform climate change policies and actions. Thank you.
Okay, Daktari, I think it will be your turn then to just respond to those two.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to thank the Elizabeth and Dr. Mary for the wonderful comments they've made. Elizabeth is actually calling all of us in academia to wake up and do something. It's one thing to have the knowledge, and it's another thing to actually act. And also, I think it's important from our submission that the university leaves the comfort zone. We have been in the comfort zone for a long time, where all we do is teach, research, publish, teach, research, publish. But the question is, what are the effects of our publications as researchers? How many people read our publications? So we end up only informing ourselves. So I think Elizabeth is bringing a very nice dimension to this by saying that the academics need to wake up and be able to now use this knowledge to engage other people outside academia and work together with them and be able to act for climate change mitigation and adaptation. And I think that's and I'm happy to learn about some of the measures that she's actually taking in Nigeria. That's really good. Dr. Mary, you are very right that even a few universities that are already doing something about, climate change in terms of research have not gone ahead to disaggregate by gender and to mainstream issues of gender. And I think that's what this presentation is saying, that we need to think about how do we ensure that we mainstream gender within climate change education, that as we mainstream climate change in all courses, but also programs, research, and community engagement, we must not be blind about gender and how women and men can equally participate in many of these issues. So I think that's really very, very good. And I'm so grateful for those comments. Thank you.
Faith Lumonya, you've asked a question. Can you share experience on developing the National Action Plan on Gender and Climate Change? What is your experience? Faith, if you could just clarify which National Action Plan is this? Is it Kenya, Uganda, or Tanzania, for clarity purposes, so that we know if you can be able to, that is for Nigeria. Probably this is a question that is intended for our speaker who just left. I'm seeing Samson who left the podium. That is Elizabeth, if I'm not very wrong. Probably will give her time to respond to that specifically. But Samson Kidera, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Oh, thanks a lot. And I'm sorry for coming late. I thought I would not join this particular discussion, but fortunately, I'm here with you. So I'm Samson Dera from Kenya, from the State Department for Fisheries, Aquaculture, the Blue Economy, the Ministry of Agriculture. We have known the role of academia in shaping a number of policy guidelines or direction that will influence a number of decisions and a number of legislations that will guide on climate actions. Now, if you look at the Paris Agreement on climate change, then we are coming up on how gender will be mainstreamed to see how these particular mitigations or adaptations are fixed in regard to women and the rest. Now, my question will be that just as one of the speakers said, most of the universities around the world usually do what is known as research for publishing, and a number are not currently doing commissioned research, whereby then maybe the government or other organizations being the customer, and then there's something they need in terms of research in regard to gender. So what is the current existing collaborations between universities and these particular organizations that could be both private and public to ensure that they inform the kind of policies that will guide this kind of agenda? That is my question. Thank you.
You can take that, and Elizabeth, if you're there, after Dr. takes that question, probably you could give us a bit of a very brief experience.
Thank you very much. I am still here. I was trying to respond when I noticed that you said if I'm here. Very briefly, what we've done is, let me say, the civil society organizations in Nigeria have been instrumental in ensuring that government recognize the dimension of the climate change from the gender perspective. And why do I say that? At any given opportunity at the national level, the CSOs are there, sometimes even when you are not invited, but you get to know, you find yourself there, and then you are able to make interventions as far as climate change is concerned, that look, there is this important dimension that we need to look at. And then the academia also added, because as an academics, I remember when I started intervening through a civil society organization, and that's where that ICCASA supported to do, to facilitate this process. And so the academia have done their part, and then the development UN agencies and development organizations have done their part. And then most importantly, the government, in recognition of the issues of climate change as a global threat, to overall sustenance, but the impact, the actions at the community level, they accepted, they identified with this, and then climate change DEX was created in the Federal Ministry of Environment, that is at the national level. So at the sub-national level, they continue to ensure, and with the support of civil society operating at the sub-national level, that is at the states level, ensure that the various ministries of either environment or environment and water resources are also, paying attention to this. So from the national, we have a lot of instruments, and eventually the civil society kept pushing, look, we can't have a desk, it has to be a department. So for several years now, we have a full-fledged Department of Climate Change, and following from the global discourse of UNFCCC actions and up, and down to fast forward to 2015, we have the nationally determined contributions, the first one, and then now they've just reversed and about the president about to ascend to the second one. And so whenever the civil society organizations meet, a lot of them, including for recent also 21st centuries, a host of others I cannot mention, they've been part of the movement of gender and climate change from the global level and down to also the regional level, and this down to this level. So when they came from, I think the Lima work plan, that the issue of gender and climate change was a kind of adopted.
Okay,
We moved
Elizabeth,
from-
just wind up. We are running out of time, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's, in summary, that's how we've been able to come this far. It was agreed we had a national coalition, it lose one for that matter, but then we're able to work with the ministry and with the support of the Ministry of Environment, with support from donor agencies, including ICCASA, we're able to facilitate, support the ministry with the finance, and then we now, several consultations were done, inclusive, we now have that plan, which was launched 2 months ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Just 1 minute to respond to
Okay, to Samson.
Samson Kidera.
Thank you so much, Samson Kidera, for that question. And I just want to say that many universities have a lot of knowledge, but this knowledge quite often only ends up into journals or books, and many of the policymakers don't actually read this. So we are saying that as a way of playing a very active role, can we see the university translate this knowledge into an engagement where they can simplify their knowledge and be able to engage policymakers to be able to do this. So that policy interface is very important, but of course there is a challenge. Part of my research findings, I discovered that the two universities, even when they are doing research around climate change, almost 92% of their research is funded by donors. Now, because it is funded by donors, then there is a problem that this research is donor-driven. So the donors dictate on the research questions, the donors dictate on all issues that are to be researched, even the methodology and everything. And there is no stake of the governments, there is no stake of local authorities into this. So again, the policy research interface within our universities, especially in the African context, is always affected by the funding that universities quite often can't significantly engage policymakers, because they can only do research when there's someone funding them. And quite often this will be a white man somewhere. So we think that there's a need to engage universities maybe to innovatively come up with ways, or even engage government to fund research on climate change so that it can actually be useful to inform policy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ssekamatte, and thank you everyone for participating. I'll just read one chat as we wind up from Vitalis Juma. As an extension officer, I feel we need to transform the diverse knowledge, agreements, policy strategies into actions by implementing bureaucracies where workshops are convened to plan for other workshops. I think that really sums up our issues here today. We are winding up and would like to really thank everyone for being part of this conversation. We've come to the end of our 5th conversation on gender and climate change in Africa. This conversation will be uploaded on the ICCASA YouTube channel and Facebook page, and I encourage everyone to continue the conversation from there. Our next conversation will be on July 20th, starting 3 p.m. Kenyan time, and we will have the pleasure of hosting Mr. Samson Kidera, who will be dialoguing on the importance of sex disaggregated data for informing climate change policies in Africa. Finally, I encourage whoever would like to be a guest speaker to send us your name and topic to info@icasa-africa.org and copy F. Gikunda, FGIKUNDA @icasa-africa.org, or post it on the ICCASA YouTube and Facebook page. I thank everyone and hope to see you in 2 weeks' time on 20th July at 3 p.m. Nairobi time. Bye everyone, and thanks for staying all the way up to now. We are really grateful for your presence and your contributions and very rich insights. Thank you and bye.
Bye, members.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.